everybody. My name's Alice Butler and I am the Manager of Enterprise Platform Services for the Department of Education in Queensland. I have been many hats over many years in the department, and I've also worked in private enterprise for large data centres and service providers in Queensland. I've done sysadmin, AD, security, a bit of everything. So when they kind of threw the cloud at me, it was, the next big challenge. So I'm just going to walk through a little bit of, I've been on basically a 2-year journey of securing my enterprise cloud, and I've made a lot of mistakes and I've learned a lot, and I thought maybe I could help some of you from making the same mistakes that I did. So take what you need, borrow it, steal it, I don't care. And we'll get going. So why are we still talking about this in 2021? So really what happened to us, I'll tell you a little bit. We had a huge blowout in cloud costs. We had a lot of application teams running and putting stuff in the cloud without needing infrastructure teams anymore. And we had a couple of security incidents. So we had a crypto VM, which was a lot of fun, and they're like, oh, can't you just restore it from a backup? That doesn't exist. So yeah, we had that happen, and then we had a pen test that went horribly wrong, and nobody knew how to get the logs out. So this really highlighted the maturity of our cloud services within the department, and I was assigned to go on this journey to mature our cloud services and put some security and stuff in at the same time. So cloud generally is not trusted by large enterprises still, and that's because it's fear-based, right? They don't understand that the cloud is really just setting up a new data center from scratch. It's still seen as risky for this reason, and it changes constantly. People are really not good at keeping up with the change cadence that's happening in the cloud, and keeping that in mind and then adjusting their application and their security for those changes. Cloud's also seen as a way around traditional governance, so that thing I was talking about where you don't need infrastructure teams anymore, you can just bung any old thing in the cloud, woohoo, it works! But it's not secure. So, for example, you have your traditional sort of infrastructure on the right there, and you've got, all the years worth of infrastructure you've built up for your security in depth, your firewalls, your IPS, IDS, your IM, your SSL certificate, PKI infrastructure, all of that good stuff that you've built up. So you can put an app in there, like a domain controller or similar, and know by default, all that stuff's there. But if you have a look on the left, if I go and build that same domain controller in the cloud, I get a server, a NIC, an IP address, a network security group, and a virtual network, so a subnet. Yeah, that's what you get. So you can't assume that all this stuff comes with it. And that's why it's kind of risky to just go and jam any old stuff in the cloud without actually going through and building it like it's an entirely new data center. So you've been given the job of securing the cloud for your organization. Where do you go, where do you start? I mean, it's such a huge beast. Where do you even begin? Start, number one, get access to the cloud. If you don't already have access to your organization's cloud, get access. And don't change anything yet. This is important. You don't want to lose the trust of all your customers first up. So get access, don't change anything. Get an inventory of everything that's already there. All the security that might be in there or might not be in there in this case. And have a look for any sort of glaring issues in security monitoring if it's enabled. Most of these cloud platforms have like a secure score or a gamified score for your security stance in the platform. Have a look at that and get a good baseline of what's there and what's missing. Then get your big boss on board and get them to communicate what your goal is, what they've tasked you with to the organisation. This is really important because you need to have that endorsement so that your customers really know that you've been given this goal and they need to support you in this goal. From there, you need to engage your customers. Now, your customers in this sense, even if it's internal, are people that consume cloud, whether it's DevOps, DevSecOps, whatever the flavour is. Talk to these guys and girls and find out what their bugbears are and tell them about what you're doing and how it's going to affect them. And yeah, get them used to you being around and being the point of contact for all this sort of stuff. Then you want to engage your cloud provider for support or guidance. So this is really just touching base with them and finding out who their contact points are and letting them know what you've been charged with from a organisational stance. And yeah, say like, I'm the new owner of cloud for my organisation, so anything cloud, come to me. They might be able to offer some resources, some training, all that sort of stuff, so that's always handy. Then on to phase 2 is really the CISP stuff. So this is where your regulatory and legislative requirement stuff comes in really handy. Check for any of those sort of requirements, including stuff like your data sovereignty laws that you might need to be engaged with, be compliant with. And then yeah, keep those in mind when you're planning for all the work that you're doing in the cloud. Your next step is really to look at best practice. So all these cloud providers really do have a lot of documentation available for best practice in the cloud. This is really awesome because it means you don't have to go and recreate the wheel. Just use best practice. It's there. We've always done it this way on-prem is also the good old theme of the day by the sounds of it. I've heard Jess talk about it earlier. It doesn't have to apply to cloud. You can, when you design cloud components, design them with the cloud in mind. You don't have to repeat old patterns because we've always done it this way for the last 25 years or whatever the case may be. I fell for this one quite early on. So we put in a naming standard for the cloud in at very early stages of our journey, and we went, oh, we've got to name it like this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and this, because that's how we do it on premise. That's how we identify a resource. But it didn't really make sense, because the cloud has things like tags and all those sorts of good stuff, where you can actually organise your resources in a really well thought out way, and it makes it so much easier to find stuff. So you don't have to name it like this server with this function with this number in this data center. So you don't have to repeat those old patterns at all. Plan out your immediate priorities is the next step. So go through and look at how you would apply tagging, set up privileged accounts, your cloud sort of structure, so that's like accounts and organizations in AWS, or tenants and subscriptions and resource groups if you're looking at Azure. And then look at how you're going to set up your ID and access management components. So that's really around, are you going to stretch your existing identity platform from on-prem into the cloud, or are you creating something from scratch? Also consider your network design. So same thing, are you going to extend your existing network into the cloud, or are you going to create a separate network segment for the cloud and keep it isolated? Next is really getting your customers on board and communicating your plans. So this is constant customer contact. Keep them informed every step of the way. If you hold their hand through the change journey, it makes your life so much easier. If you just change stuff on them overnight, they get really upset and defensive, and they'll probably won't support you. So org change, as they call it, so holding your customer's hand through the whole journey, is probably the most important part of this entire exercise. And then remember, just enough security. So you don't want to put so much security in straight off the bat that your customers now can't do their job the way they've always done it. You need to consider that they might not be ready for, 5 types of multi-factor and all this sort of stuff, right? You need to think, what is the bare minimum security that we need that will satisfy our requirements, that won't impact the way that they currently do their job. From there we move on to phase 3. So phase 3 is really the tactical get stuff done phase. So phase 3 is about consolidating all your accounts. So this is really important because you want to, by consolidating your accounts, you have everything in one place. So that's one place to apply governance, one place to apply security controls, one place to manage and find resources if something goes wrong. Next step is around tagging. Now, tagging is not typically a security control, but this is why it's super important for security. Consider you're in a security operations center and you get an alert that says resource A, B, C, D, E, F, G, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the cloud has been attacked. How do you know what that is? How do you know if it's important? You don't have any idea unless you have some sort of clarifying information to let you know. So this is where tags can be used to really help you and your security ops teams in identifying important resources to protect when you're looking at cloud security. So you can have things like the type of data that's stored in the application, the criticality of the application, the zone that it's in, if it's a test or a dev zone or a prod zone. All that sort of information put together can really give you an idea of the risk profile that you're looking at when you do get a security alert. The next step's really around cleanup. So it's a bit boring, but it's important. Clean up all your old stuff, get rid of it. It's probably costing you money, and it's probably maybe even an old type of resource that might be vulnerable or unsupported. So get rid of it, or get your customers to get rid of it, give them a reasonable time frame. But yeah, get rid of it, it's not worth it. Identity as a security boundary. So this is probably the big part of cloud. So identity is, the new security boundary for cloud. So you need to make sure that your identity is as strong as possible because everything relies on your identity. Implement privileged identity management, multi-factor authentication, role-based access controls, and identity conditions. Reduce your God level admins down as few as possible. Identity conditions are things like using a policy or a conditional access policy to prevent impossible travel or enforce MFA if someone's logging on from an untrusted location. All those sorts of things layered up will really help you. Next, you want to integrate with your SIEM SOAR. So by doing that, you give your security team one place to look, and they don't have to go and train in yet another platform that is a monitoring platform. They just have their known good monitoring system that they've always used that they can look at and rely on. Then you really need to go through and enforce onboarding of security monitoring agents for behaviour and vulnerability. You can enforce this by default, so it's kind of good because it means anything new that comes on will automatically get these monitoring agents, and then you can push it out to any existing resources as well, so you know everything's covered. You can also use policies to enforce encryption at rest, which I don't think I need to say much more about. You just want to protect your data that's at rest, so that if you do get breached, at least you know that that stuff is secured. And network security teams need to be prepped and get them used to looking at all the various functions that network plays in the cloud. There's multiple ways to configure network stuff. So get them used to having a look at that, and get them familiarized, and to get them to start planning out all the components. Create 2 offline break glass accounts. So as Jess was talking about earlier, 2 is a minimum, so you can create more if you want, but at least 2. I recommend keeping them in a safe offline. Don't use them ever, unless you need to. So on to phase 4. Phase 4 is really kind of a retrospective, so you need to go back and look at everything that you've done up till this point and configure monitoring and alerting for your health and availability stuff. Configure your backups and make sure that you're only backing up what you need to back up for a start, and make sure you're only keeping it for as long as you need to feasibly recover from a disaster. It's not supposed to be a document management system. It's supposed to be there to recover from disasters. So I've seen, backups being kept for 2 years, and feasibly you're not going to really go back 2 years in time for an application and restore that data. So don't keep it longer than you need to. So go through and review and tune all the work that you've done up to this point. It's okay to be wrong. Go through and see, like I was talking about the naming standard that I created and it wasn't working for us. It's okay to go back and redo those things. We did a tagging policy pretty early on in the piece, and we enforced it against every resource, and then we found out that some resources don't actually support tags. So we had a lot of problems with deployments of certain components of applications that didn't support tags, and we had to rethink how we did it. So that's okay, it's cloud, fail forward, go and redo it and figure out a better way of doing it, but it's okay to be wrong, just move forward. Then make a to-do list of all those little bits that you've seen along the way that you haven't had time to do, and get in there and prioritize that list, but don't action it yet, because that's phase 5. Phase 5, you get to fix all these little bits. So it's really about focusing on fine-tuning all these little bits and identifying the big strategic opportunities. So a strategic opportunity in normal person speak, not government executive speak, is a piece of work that adds a lot of value that takes a bit longer to achieve. So what you want to do is think about, if you hadn't already extended your identity stuff, the value it would add by extending identity from on-premise into the cloud, or even your network into the cloud if that's something you wanted to do, or even connecting your networks between multiple clouds if that's something you want to do. They're going to take a bit longer to nut out and do properly, but it's worth doing. If it's worth doing, then it's something that you want to identify in this stage. Then you want to really look at strengthening your security posture. So this is really around all your little bits like VM hardening, patch management, network hardening. So closing off any of those open ports that people have left open to the internet or whatever. Encryption in transit. So that's talking to all your customers at dev and DevOps teams, making sure they start building encryption in transit into their applications. Enforce just-in-time access to VMs and use Bastion services where possible. Then you need to start looking at the security alerts that you're getting and really have a look at the false positives that you're getting, and the stuff that is coming from apps teams and their poor behaviour is an opportunity for you to teach them better. So, remoting in from outside of the network to do work outside of hours, rather than going from a trusted endpoint and all that sort of stuff. So use it to teach them a better way of doing it. Then it's time for access audits. Everybody's favourite time, yes. So access audits are really important to do regularly. So have a process to do them regularly. Get everybody to define their role-based access control requirements. So what do you need to do your job? What applications do you do it against? what's your business justification for that, and how long do you need it for. So those sort of requirements are important to gather regularly and check against those regularly. So maybe a 6-month process or sooner if you have requirements for that within your organisation. Have a process to go through and audit those access controls. Then go back into your security center or your security management toolsets in your cloud and look at your secure score now. You should be able to measure your success for all the various controls that you've now put in. Now, phase 6 is all about continuous improvement. Hooray! So the cloud is always changing. This is really important. You need to constantly monitor the changes for the cloud. Don't assume that something you put in now is going to be the same in 2 years' time, 5 years' time. You need to monitor it constantly and pay attention to those alerts that come from your provider. So you'll find quite often they'll email out saying, hey, we're going to change this particular component to now run a newer version of this software, and you need to change to be in line with that by this date. So make sure that your customers get that information, because you don't want to end up on a newspaper article or, Reddit or something because your application's gone offline because you didn't upgrade when you were supposed to. And then really talk to your cloud provider. So if you're an enterprise customer, chances are that you probably have an account manager or technical account manager that can really help you organize a training plan. Whoop. You're all good? They can help you organize a training plan, and from there they can possibly even give you a discount or a free sort of training program that you can use to get all of your staff at least the most basic foundational training. And from there you want to make sure that your security teams and your cloud teams at least have specialized training. Once you have at least that done, you can organize a training program to roll out across everyone that has a hand in cloud, but try and focus on those to start with. This is where you also can start planning out those bigger strategic pieces. They might take a bit longer for you to do, probably years, but that's why they're strategic pieces, right? So get a plan in for those and start getting those rolling as soon as you can. And from there you just start building those patterns of regular used components as code or even how-to guides. So this is really to build security in by default at the beginning, and it also saves the devs a lot of pain, so they're more likely to use your code, because let's face it, developers are pretty lazy sometimes when it comes to coding, where they'll just grab something off the internet. So if you've already got that code built for them and you know it's trusted, they can build that in by default as part of a pattern and infrastructure as code, they call it sometimes. But it makes your life a lot easier, and it means you have a good trusted platform to go from. I have a reference slide here if you need to take a picture, so I'll leave that up for a little bit. Cloud pooping. Alrighty, just to recap. So the goal of cloud security is just enough security. You need to keep your customers informed every step of the way, because that's how you affect good org change. Identity is the most important security boundary for cloud. Build up your security layers over time. You don't have to big bang approach it. Then use best practice where possible. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. Configure monitoring alerting for health and availability. Make sure you do access audits regularly and make it part of your standard process. Then template the common components used and build code for those so that you have security by default. Thank you for coming, everyone, and happy cloud security.
Perfect time. Anyone got any questions? Yep, one down the back here.
Hi. I'm one of those lazy developers that you talked about. So I'm really, really interested in like your view as a security engineer, more if you're, say, shifting like what had been legacy applications to cloud infrastructure, and the options that you face between going, great, there's like services here which are provided by the cloud vendor. So if you know, whether it's database or like a Redis service or anything, versus like self-hosting that within that same infrastructure. Is there strong preferences either way, strong arguments for either of those options?
Right. Sorry, it was just repeating your question. So that's really about would you go with software that you already have in your suite versus vendor-provided software? Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. So
Right.
Application components where there might be that service provided as an off-the-shelf thing, but you no longer have visibility of what, like how that might be operating.
Absolutely, yeah. We struggled with this one ourselves because obviously, you know, many years worth of infrastructure investments over time. So it's like, do you use your investments that you already have and build upon that, or do you use off-the-shelf, easy to configure stuff? And I guess the real answer is whatever works for you. At the moment, we prefer just off-the-shelf just because it's easy to configure and do as provide as code already configured. But some organisations may be able to do that already within their cloud environment. So that's just my personal experience, but whatever works for you is the answer, I guess.
Anyone else?
So you mentioned about monitoring, you know, the cloud provider updating, you know, their controls and having to be in line with that. How do you manage that and monitor it, and then also look for misconfigurations with those multi-cloud environments? Is that sort of a CSPM type direction you'd head in, or is that something you'd recommend and automate that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So part of that is a lot of cloud providers provide bulletins around the changes that are upcoming in their environment regularly. That's what I've noticed anyway as a cloud owner. But there's also, I guess, you know, blogs and all that sort of stuff that come out and various feeds that you can incorporate. But then on top of that, you also have, I guess, your vulnerability and your security monitoring that you can constantly refer to if you do need to see, you know, what's the state of my environment, what's changed, what's going on that might not have been picked up by my SecOps teams or my cloud teams that I need to really be aware of. I think there's also an alerts section, I might be wrong, yes, that you can view any sort of recent changes to your cloud investments as well. So
is that a centralised thing, or is that
No,
cloud
well, this
environment?
is specific to, in my experience, using Azure specifically. We do use a very small amount of AWS, but we're still on this journey for AWS at the moment, so I can't speak for that, but yeah, for Azure.
One more round of applause, let's do it.